everyone. We have Pete Giordano here to talk about pricing today. You guys, some of you may have met Pete on the first day at orientation. Pete has, held every role in enterprise software companies and knows the gears of any company that, and how it works together. He's a University of Michigan alum, and he now works with accelerators, angel investors, and VCs to help their seed and Series A companies accelerate their product, go-to-market strategy, sales, and customer success. So Pete, with that, I will hand it over to you.
All right, thanks, Peach. I'm so glad to be here. Like usual, I am honored and delighted to be here. I hope everybody that hung on from the last session stays on, right? Like it sounds like that was a good cross-functional team from all your different cohorts and things. Is that right? Is that like, yeah, cool. That's awesome. Very, very cool. I have one question. If someone can tell me, is there a way to get the Zoom app to stay on top? Because I've got two screens and I want to just, can someone tell me about that as I'm getting set up here? I didn't know if I was able to do that or not. I'm looking in my general settings and on my video settings, but I don't see it. Does someone know? If you know, just let me know. Maybe.
What do you mean stay on top?
Oh, just I don't want it to get covered by another window. I want it to always remain at the forefront. But yeah, it's not a big.
You'd be able to just share your screen, and then it'll give you an option to select a window.
And oh no, that's not what I'm talking about. It's about I want the Zoom. I want to be able to see you guys. And anyway, I'll figure it out. I appreciate that. That's not.
There's a in the top right corner. There's a square that will take you to full screen. Is that what you mean?
Yeah.
No, I think if you click on the minimize option, it should automatically make it picture-in-picture.
Okay, let me try that. Maybe that's what, okay, let me give that a whirl. All right, so let's go ahead and share. And we're gonna share desktop one. I think I wanna share this here. All right, yeah, that's better, except I wanna move that over here. That's what I was looking for. I use about 15 different of these like each day. So I got to get used to the right one. All right, guys, awesome. All right, well, with that, let's get started. So I do another talk with Alchemist on go-to-market. And I have this framework around go-to-market. It's 5 different pillars. And it was interesting because one of the primary pillars in that is pricing. So that led to actually having a conversation with Peach and Danielle and the team and getting involved in putting together a pricing discussion as well. And so it was really great to actually pull this together because I was able to take one of those 5 pillars of a go-to-market and I was really to examine it deeply. And I learned a lot and I'm really excited to share that with you today. What I will say though is that to kind of go together. And I know I've done the go-to-market, but I can't keep track of which group I'm giving it to. And so one thing I'll do at the end of this is share both the go-to-market as well as this pricing one, right? So you have both, okay? That sound cool? Awesome. And then the other thing is I have this presentation and I don't know yet. Yeah, I guess you don't see this, like the slide numbers or whatever. There's a bunch of slides. I have a lot in backup. So what I want to do is kind of run through some of this and then leave a lot of time for Q&A. That said, I mean, feel free, like let's just, I don't know the way you guys are working this, but if there is if you guys are doing like raising a hand on the video or on the chat, or if Peach, if you're monitoring, please, like I'm going to make some natural pauses, but if you have a question, just stop me, right? It's just supposed to be more of a discussion with me just sharing some things, okay? Sound good? Thumbs up? Thumbs up. Awesome. All right. Okay. Well, why don't we go ahead and get started? So I thought the applicable title here would be, it's really the answer you're looking for, right? What price for my product? And let's see. Peach did a great job of introing me. And yes, I do. I spend most of my time now really focusing on this intersection of product strategy and go to market. And like Peach was saying, I thought it'd be good to share just a little bit of background. As she was saying, like, I've worked in small companies, very large companies, founded a couple companies, and held a role in held roles in every area of a software company. And the steel thread through this experience has always been around building new businesses. And that's whether I was inside of a large company or building a new company myself or with co-founders. And it's through that experience that I developed a very systems thinking approach. And it provides a lot of insights and perspectives on building business. When you have these different domains, you can start to see the connections. And that's why I like to use the gear kind of analogy or metaphor, because they really are all connected. And when one spins, the others spin as well. And so now I'm spending most of my time working with startups, and I work with companies that are involved with institutions like the one you see here. And one of my favorites, of course, is Alchemist. So one of the things I like to do is just set up a little bit of the assumptions. And first, obviously, the talk is really set for early stage B2B startup. That's defined by you being in the program with Alchemist. But really, I think what's important is that you're building this venture scale business. And the reason I bring that up is because not all businesses need to be venture scale. And some of the things that we're going to be talking about here may not apply if you weren't building this kind of venture scale business, right? And another assumption is that you've got a product, either idea, or maybe you even have it in the market. You've raised maybe some money, and you're definitely looking to raise additional money and enter some liquidity event down the road, i.e. you're a venture-backed business. And that, approaching this $100 million a year in revenue mark is kind of a target, right? And I think that's what venture scale, venture-backed businesses get to go for, right? Sound good? Good assumptions? All right, I look down here because that's where I have you guys on my screen. So if it doesn't look like I'm looking right at you, it's just because of the online show here. Cool. All right, so what I thought, to give us context, I thought I would use an example product. And so I picked one, an API monitoring SaaS product. And when we take a closer look at that, the top line value prop is leverage user-centric API analytics to drive adoption, usage, and retention. And we have a few kind of features, so to speak, or maybe benefits. And we have some features that are available, or capabilities that are available in this product, right? So we'll be referring back to this as we go through this little talk. So let me pause there. What I'd like to hear are maybe from two or three people. Just I know I've kind of launched into this, but I'd love to hear kind of what were some of your expectations? What do you want to hear about or learn about during this session? And so I might be able to kind of touch on some points. What are some of the, maybe a better way to put it is, what are some of the things you're thinking about or struggling with or trying to make decisions about when it comes to pricing that you hope to gain some insight to?
So I have one, if I may. This is Kathy Lippert with
Yeah.
Seventh AI. We're pretty early. We're trying to price our products, obviously. And what we find is that part of it is a negotiation and part of it should be, list pricing discipline. So I'm just wondering for this session, whether you can lead us through that dichotomy of what we have to do when we first are confirming product market fit with pricing in the mix.
Interesting. Okay, good. Anybody else like that?
I have.
Okay.
Oh. Yes. Well, I was just saying. 1 second. I'm just gonna put the video. So right now we are also doing the pricing, and we have right now a challenge that is that they are our clients are expecting to have better productivity with our product without increasing their cost. But the thing is that we are approaching different markets that have different costs. So UK are the human salary is way lower than in Germany. So how can we approach expectations? Do we put ourselves on the up level
I get you.
or
Yep.
down? Yeah.
I think that one I have a good, let's save that one somehow. Maybe Peach, you can help me keep track of some of these things. So one is, you know, how to manage pricing for a single product when you have very different demographics in different markets.
Yeah, I have another question as well.
Yeah, just one more and then we're going to get going here, but please go ahead.
Okay, thanks. So I have a software that applies for pizza, basically, for pizza stores, franchises. And I have a discrepancy between the macro pricing, because let's suppose franchise stores make a one-digit income margin. But at the same time, if I go to the unit economics, I can think, you know, it should be my product should be a percentage of the pizza price, individual pizzas. And of course, if I look at on the macro side, I can't charge more than $99. But if I go on the unit economics, I can reach up to $700.
Okay. I think that's going to deserve a little bit more discussion, but I like that one too. You're trying to get into the economics of your buyer, and I think that's a really good thing. Cool. All right, guys. So let's go ahead and move forward. If you wouldn't mind, go ahead and mute while we move forward. And I'll, just given the setting that we have here, I'll give you a nod when we want to. I'll pause for questions. And if you do have a question, go ahead and ping the chat, and maybe Peach can get my attention because I have her on the video screen here. All right. So one of the things that I wanted to really kind of start with is just how critical pricing is to unlocking growth. And it took me some time to really understand this. In fact, so much so that this I would consider this almost one of the number one or number two drivers of growth. And the reason is that when you develop a capability and a discipline around pricing, right? When you've optimized pricing, in order to quote optimize pricing, that means that you have absolutely nailed your buyer persona, right? Your target market, your market segment. You've got your product packaging down. You know exactly what features those buyers want. You know exactly what the key value prop and the benefits are enabled by those features for that buyer. You actually now know what their incentive to buy because you know what they value and you know how they value it. You know how to capture the value you're providing. You know how to charge for the value you're providing, and you know how much to charge. And I mean, if you look at this list, this is basically building a company, right? So pricing is this single, simple word, but it encompasses so much of what it is to build a company, right? To be an entrepreneur, to be a founder, right? To find a problem with a business, a product. And of course, you've got to do all this with great unit economics, right? Someone was just touching on that. And so one of the things I like to think about, and I drew this to try to help to see how all of this is impacted. And I promise I'll get to the real pricing stuff here in a second. But when you have better pricing, it creates a growth flywheel. And when you have better pricing, because of all those things I just mentioned, right? You've nailed your buyer personas, your value prop, your features, your benefits, all of it. Well, guess what? That better fit leads to customers sticking around with you longer, increased retention. Well, increased retention provides increased lifetime value of that customer. And when you have the lifetime value increasing, they are going to buy more product, the same product, more new products, and your recurring revenue, your monthly revenue, your yearly revenue, whatever that metric is, you're going to start seeing expansion, right? This is revenue growth within the customer. And when that happens, you've got extra capital that you can then pour back into and invest back into product, the value propositions, the capabilities, benefits, back into sales and marketing, right? And then the flywheel continues, right? This creates that growth that your company, your startup needs. But here's where it gets really interesting, right? This is where it compounds. And that is why it's a flywheel. because the better fit, because you're better targeting those buyer personas, right? Because you've done this research, you have higher sales productivity because it's easier to find the right people that are going to buy your product. And when you can do that more effectively, you're going to dramatically decrease your customer acquisition costs. And when that happens, you decrease the payback period. Now, this is getting into a little bit of the accounting, but it is really, really important. There's an article by Thomas Tungus on this about why payback period is so critical. And when you can decrease that payback period, it's about decreasing your cost of capital. Everyone in this program is here to go to demo day and raise interest from investors to raise money, which is fuel in your tank. That fuel has a cost. If you can dramatically decrease the cost of that fuel, your vehicle, your company runs a lot longer. This is absolutely essential to understand, right? And so when you decrease that cost of capital, it provides an incredible amount of capital for you, that's cheap capital, by the way, for you to then pour back into the investment, and the cycle continues. It is such an incredibly powerful knob to turn in your business. And so I hope all of you leave this presentation super excited about developing a discipline and a capability, a first-tier process within your company around pricing. Okay, so that's the stump speech on pricing and pricing optimization. So, with this in mind, let's get back to the basic question, right? Like, so what price for my product? And many of you probably know this, but I thought it was worth mentioning because it flows into what we're going to talk about here, which is the price you charge has absolutely nothing to do with the cost to produce it, right? I think most of us know that, right? Because the reality is that cost plus pricing is really relegated to commodity businesses, right? And furthermore, cost plus pricing, this is where you figure out your cost to produce an item, and you just raise the price of that by 10% and you sell it at that price, right? That's cost plus. You can't extract the value from the innovation and the value that you're delivering to your customer. And because of that, you never generate economics that are needed for a venture scale business, right? So this idea of just using COGS, cost of goods sold, as a basis for price is a wrong step. That is if you take that step, you're already in the wrong direction. The other angle on this is that there's absolutely no relation between the cost of your product and the value that it provides to a customer. And that brings us to an incredibly important insight for this talk. And that is that price is actually a measure of how the customer perceives value that your product provides. And this is where it gets to be a little bit difficult, right? Because now you've got to get inside that customer's head, right? So price is actually a measure of how the customer perceives the value that your product provides. Okay, so back to the question. Right, price. We just covered it. It means what do customers value, right? And so this is one of the first questions you've got to answer. And then you've got to answer, well, if I know what they value, I have to understand how they value it, right? So that I can start to think about how I can capture some of that value. Well, what price has another couple of questions associated with it. These are more obvious, right? It's how do I charge? Am I charging, like our example product, by API call or dashboard user? Is it by user per month, number of records stored? What is that way of charging? And of course, the top level question, well, what's my price point, right? How much do I charge? So I figured with those two in mind, you actually have to put all this together, right? And so it comes down to, in order to answer those previous questions, you've actually got to figure out which customers value my product the most, because those are the ones you want to go to first. And then, of course, how do they measure value? And then how do I capture the value that I'm providing? Okay. So if we look at all this together, it looks something like this, right? So on one side of the customer side, we've got perceived value. This is really what we're going after, right? So the important components of this are which customers, what do those customers value, and how do they measure value? And that is the key to you unlocking how you're going to price. And then on your side, on your company side, you need to understand first, how do I capture the value that they enjoy and that they value? How do I charge for it, and how much do I charge? So these are our 6 areas, and these are basically 6 chapters of today's talk. All right, sound good? Let me see, thumbs up, thumbs down. How's the pace so far? Good, awesome. All right, why don't we get started? So which customers? So we're all using, I think, business model canvas, is that right? Value proposition canvas. Right? And so we start thinking about like what market segment. One of the people earlier said, well, I'm trying to sell this product in 2 different countries. By definition, those are 2 different markets. It creates problems for a startup. Good when you're a big company, horrible when you're a young company. And we'll get to that. Right, so is the market big enough? You have to be thinking about like what category of products am I actually in, right? How does the customer think about what I'm providing? What solution area is it, right? And of course, these jobs to be done. I'm going to bring this up a lot. I know everybody's familiar with jobs to be done. You guys are using this as a concept for really thinking about value prop and product design. Is that right? Thumbs up if you guys are. Yeah. Maybe, maybe not. I'm not seeing any thumbs up. Let me open this up a little bit so I can see more screens. Okay. A big piece you have to understand is like, well, do they care? If you start trying to go figure out pricing before you actually figure out if customers care, you're doing the wrong thing, right? One of the first things you need to do is back up and validate the problem you intend to solve is extremely high urgency and importance, and it has to be both. Those 2 are very different. Importance and urgency are not the same. One is about strategic importance to the company. The other is about the time frame for solving it. Something can be incredibly important, but have a very long term, which doesn't go with building a startup. You need to sell this quarter, this year, and so forth, right? So you've got to make sure the customers you're looking at and talking to, and that you think are the ones you're selling to, have an urgent, important problem to solve. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about personas and profiles here. So for most of my life, I've always thought of like the target segment as an ideal customer profile. And as I started getting more proficient around pricing in the last 5, 10 years, I've really developed a 2 kind of stage version of this. And first is this idea of an ideal customer profile. And this is what most people think about. It's really a set of demographics, characteristics that describe certain types of companies that would be good targets, right? So it's all of these demographic ideas or characteristics rather, you see on the left. But what's important when we talk about pricing are buyer personas. These are the people that are involved in the decision-making unit, sometimes called a buying group. It's mission critical. If you're not thinking about your target customers along these 2 dimensions with all of these characteristics and more, then your pricing expedition will be a failure, right? You have to be honed in on the buyer personas. One of the big things about buyer personas is that you have to get a good understanding of both these observable characteristics, things that you can find in LinkedIn, like the role of the person, the title of the person. But you also want to understand some things that might not be evident. Things like their buying role. Are they a user? Are they a buyer, decider, a budget holder? Are they both the buyer and the decider, right? There's a whole lot there to consider. Also, you have to understand what's called a tech adoption profile. This comes out of Crossing the Chasm. And it's about understanding what type of person. Is this an innovator type person that is just trying to find technology as a tool? Or is this an early adopter that is interested in technology, but they're looking to make a quantum leap improvement, right? Not just technology for technology's sake, like an innovator. Right? So you've got to be able to uncover those unobservable characteristics as well to define your buyer persona. And really, it's related this way, right? You've got these customer profiles up here, and then you've got a set of buyer personas, 1 or more buyer personas per customer profile. And if you guys are familiar with the jobs to be done framework and using the value proposition canvas, this obviously helps us understand this buyer persona, right? The jobs, the pains, the gains. Well, one of the things we realize is that we start talking about our buyers, and we think, well, I've got this API monitoring product. Every company in every industry that's building software is using APIs, and therefore every single one of those is a potential customer for me. And this is where we go wrong as founders, right? And one of the things I like to say is, do not confuse your investor pitch with your initial go-to-market strategy. What do I mean by that? I mean, yes, eventually you can have this broad, horizontal product that is used absolutely everywhere. I grew up in a company like that. I spent 10 years at VMware, where our mission was to have virtual machines run all workloads. It was an aspiration. And as a category creator, we made it true, and that hatched the entire cloud movement that you see now. But we didn't start with that. We started with one virtual machine on a developer's desktop, right? We had an incredibly laser-focused use case and a laser-focused buyer persona, right? And this is a pitfall for founders. When you know you've got your hands on an incredibly large market, and then you decide to go attack it all at once. Mistake. And I'm sorry to sound so preachy, but I just see it over and over and over again. It's about being resource constrained as a startup and finding what I call a minimum viable customer segment. And this is where the jobs to be done and the pains and gains. The minimum viable customer segment is the most focused set of customers you can possibly get that still share the same jobs to be done, pains and gains, but represent a reasonable first market, right? One that you can spend 6 months, a year, 2 years going after and creating repeatability, predictability, scalability in your process, okay? So you might be asking, okay, how do I do this? I spend a lot more time on this in my go-to-market talk. One simple way to do it is, hey, start with your product, right? You've already had an insight about what problem you want to solve. So think about what benefits you're trying to deliver to that customer. Hopefully, if you're a startup, your benefits are innovative. You alone can provide those benefits to solve this problem. That's what makes you an innovator. If you do not have unique, differentiated benefits for that problem with that buyer, you need to find a product that does do that, because that is the way to go address the problem. And once you've figured that out, then you need to do that customer development to find the buyers who value those benefits that you're providing the most. So let me pause here, because I know I might have said some controversial things. I want to give people a chance to raise a hand. Questions, comments? Resonate with the investor pitch versus go-to-market?
From my standpoint at Botco AI, we're actually in the process of trying to figure out which is this segment, right? So we're testing a few against each other.
Yep.
And
good.
Trying to raise our prices and see where that ceiling is for us. I mean,
interesting.
But that's one way to do it. I don't know. I'd be open to other ideas of how to do it.
It is. I'm all for testing. I'm not saying don't talk to a lot of different customers across different segments. I'm not saying don't start broadly, but what I am saying is extremely quickly, radically focus down, right? So start figuring out where the key branches of the decision tree are for you and this initial segment, so that you can quickly get to it, right?
Right.
Cool. Okay, I'm going to do a quick reposition here. The way I'm set up is a little bit awkward at my desk here. Okay, awesome. All right. So kind of takeaway for this section is use data. So it's about the conversations. I know you're getting a lot of that advice in the Alchemist program. It's about, as Steve Blank likes to say, getting out of the building and talking with customers and using, I call it, journalistic style interviews, right? Ask broad questions in the area you're exploring, but let the customer lead you to what their main job to be done and the pains and gains associated with that, so that you can begin to vet, yep, this was a hit for us. Nope, that was kind of off the mark. They just don't see it the way we do, right? Okay. So when you do that, you start building something that looks like this, right? And at this stage of kind of the pricing journey, it's really about roughing out a buyer persona. And for this example, I'm using a buyer persona by the name of Mid-Market Molly. She is a director of technology. And what I've done here is provided a little bit of information, right? She's a mid-level manager, a leader, engineering, budget holder, and decision maker, right? US-based mid-market. She's got an early adopter profile. She wants to make a quantum leap improvement, right? And her job, or at least right now, one of her top 2 priorities is getting better tools to engineering. They've got an in-house product, but it's hard to use and maintain. They're currently using products like Elastic for search and for some logging. And one of the things you've learned about this segment is that they need a clear ROI and they have very limited budget. We have no idea about the cost to acquire this customer or how much they might pay us over what time frame, what their WTP or willingness to pay is, what features and benefits they value. We don't know. Now, if you had a product in market, and maybe you've got a product where you've been able to grab some data, you might actually be able to get a little bit of this information to help you rough out these personas, okay? So what you want to do is do this for the mid-market Mollies, but there might be some SMB Stewarts, there might be some enterprise Ellens, right? And so you've got to start thinking about these different personas. It doesn't need to be spread like market size like I am. It could be anything. It could be among, one thing I didn't list here is what industry, a way of sharpening this up to a minimum viable customer segment might be, these are mid-level engineering managers in healthcare companies that supply technology to insurance providers, right? So now we're getting narrower, 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 right? You cannot be afraid of keeping it that narrow. Don't worry about what investors are going to think. You don't have the resources to cover this market. You can't have enough conversations. You can't get to the depth by going to every single engineering manager that has an IT team that needs API monitoring tools, right? So you've got to get down and down and down and find the segment that, because of the way you built your product, because of the insight that you have and the benefit you provide, they value that the most. And not all customers do. You've got to find the ones that do. Okay, so if we have a better understanding of kind of which customers, right, what do we need to know? We need to know, what do they value? And a key point here, this is a quote from a 1940s insurance ad. Nobody wants a drill. They want the hole, right? And so we have to remember that customers, they don't buy products. They buy the benefit the product gives them. This is Peter Drucker. It's what we said earlier. It's about value. Customers put a price on value. The benefit delivered to them. And so what is that value, right? What is the value that we're giving to them? How do we even start to figure that out? Well, we go back to our persona. We go back to this idea of the jobs, the pains, and the gains. But we have to take it a step further. And this is something that if you research Clayton Christensen and his theory around jobs to be done and pains and gains, right? What you learn is it doesn't stop there. You have to examine the 3 dimensions. The functional dimension, just what does your product do? It does API monitoring. But what are the social and emotional dimensions of addressing those pains and gains? It makes engineers feel better because they're able to get better hold of what's going on in their environment. It makes the engineering team look better among their peers because they're on top of their business. They've got the skills and they've got the tools in place to do a great job for the company, right? You have to examine every one of these 3 dimensions because the insights, the value lies there. The customer will tell you and they will write your benefits and your messaging for you. But you have to be there, you have to be present, you have to do the one-to-one conversations. So these pains and gains represent unmet need. In our case, Molly's unmet need. And so the next question is, how does Molly then value a solution to those unmet needs. And again, we have to assume that these unmet needs are two things. Somebody tell me.
Urgent, important.
Yes, and important. You got it. So we asked, what do customers value? Just like the drill, they don't value the drill. They value the whole, right? They value the benefits your product provides to address their immediate pains and gains. Okay. So when we think about the value, it's about the benefit you provide, right? So the value you provide, if you just put this one word value, then the pillars are your benefits. But it's the features, it's the capabilities of your product that provide the benefits that provide the value. So this gives us an insight. And the insight is around using feature preferences. And you can use benefits here as attributes if you don't want to use features. But if you use feature preferences, you can start to ascertain what's important to these different personas. So in this example, I've used a, kind of an arcane, techie, nerdy, statistical market research technique. It's called best worst scaling. There's a variant that lives underneath of it called max diff. And it's a way of getting people to choose their most preferred and their least preferred. And they do this a number of times in a statistically relevant way so that you can then ascertain true preferences for things. And what's nice is that because you're using the same set of questions, you can normalize the data and look at it on a scale. My scale here is a -1 to a 1. It's always on that scale for a max diff. And that's how the data gets normalized because of the math. And anyways, it's very clear. The things pointing to the right are features, right, that the mid-market mollies of the world prefer. Body analytics, user-centric API monitoring, extensions. You could redo this and actually do it along benefits that they're looking for, right? Supposed benefits. I won't get into the details of this, but I actually have some backup. If we want to explore this a little later, we can. And what's interesting here is that when you start to talk to the different personas, you start to see different patterns. Look at SMB Stewart. SMB Stewart has high preference for features and benefits that mid-market Molly is way negative on. This is key insight. If you don't know how these different people, these different buyers are thinking about the value you provide, you have no hope of putting together a pricing monetization scheme. And so you don't have to go to the depth of leveraging an advanced statistical research method, but you've got to go and get started and start asking some of these basic questions, right, and gathering data. Let me pause there before we move on. So just a little bit on kind of, how do we figure out how they value? It's about talking to them. It's about using features and benefits as a proxy to give us clues about what they benefit. And it's about conversation. You cannot bend space and time. I guess gravity well could, but you have to get out there. You have to do the work. You have to talk to the customers. You have to put these choices in front of them, and you've got to get a better hold of it. Now, by the way, some of you might be thinking, how the hell am I going to do that? Well, you've got to take these features in this product that you've built, and you've got to convert that to features that mean something to a customer, right? It can't be the arcane kind of description you've got for your inside team. You've got to have a human readable format of that, and then it better would be to then put that in the benefit that you think that it provides, right? And then test with that. The other way to do it is to work with customers, talk to them about capabilities, and let's see where the light bulb goes on. What do they say when they hear about a feature? Would they say, oh, that gives me the ability to, right? Features are the vitamins that give superpowers to a customer. That superpower is the benefit. You want to spend the time, again, connect your features to benefits and find those benefit and feature preferences among your personas. And now you know what customers value. You don't know how much they value them, but you know what they value. Okay?
There's
Questions?
a question in the chat.
Yeah, please, Peach.
I can read it. So it says, or Chase, sorry, Brent, do you want to take yourself off mute and ask your question?
So do you know, okay, so do you show them a feature and say, what do you think? Like a fully functional built out feature or just an example of what it would be? Or is it simply just from the conversations you have based upon their prior purchasing and use habits to make these decisions?
I think there's a spectrum. I think it depends. If you're truly creating an innovative like category creation product, which by the way, extremely few companies do. Usually we're building something that's, and I don't mean any disrespect for anybody here, but they're, creating a new category, everybody looks at it this kind of golden goose, but it's very difficult and it has a lot of downside. No one knows what you are, how you work. They don't know how to budget for you. They've never seen you before, so they don't know how to implement you. They don't have an org structure for you. Like there's all these things that go along with being a category creator. So I have a kind of love-hate relationship with it. But if you're truly that new, then you've got to get in front of a customer and you've got to explain what's actually happening here, right? Like I remember, this is a while ago now, but we're explaining to customers what we were doing with virtual machines, right? Where we were actually virtualizing the CPU, the storage, and putting it in software. Like there was a huge education step, and then to explain the features, it often required a show and tell. If you're in the market around a better, CRM system or a better, chat bot or whatever, people kind of get the basics of that. You might have an insight, and it's your job as a founder to be able to be crisp about that insight and then describe it crisply. And so you might be able to do that in words or with words in a picture. But if it's not successful, you might have to then get in front of somebody live and walk them through it. And the way I do this is I always start one-to-one in person or over, a conference like this, and I walk people through it. I start to see how I'm thinking about it versus how other people see it. And that trains me. And then I start using that more. And then I can finally find something that I can have more of a scaled conversation. So I usually always start with the in-person, and then as I get the experience, can move it to a more scalable way to do the data gathering. Probably too long of an answer, sorry. Okay, so now that we have an idea of what customers, or to determine what customers value, now we have to think about how do your customers measure value? Are you guys
There are
with me
a couple other questions on the
sorry,
chat.
yeah.
Sorry,
Yeah.
sorry.
Peach, I cannot have the chat up. It's just too much.
I got you.
Yeah, so you please either read them, or it's probably more efficient if you read them because I'll take less time answering.
Yeah. So this one's from Kathy. It says, this seems quantitative, which is great. But are there any tricks to convert open conversations about what customers value into this data?
Yeah, let's talk about that at the end, because we're going to put a bunch of these pieces together and we can have an open conversation. Okay, what's the other question?
Okay, and then this one's from Armin. If you're asking open-ended questions to understand the value, how do you quantify it against different buyer personas?
Ooh, I lost you. Oh, how do you quantify the answer? Is that what that one was? If you're getting different answers from different people?
Yeah, it's literally just piggybacking off of what the previous person asked.
Okay, cool. We're going to get to that too. Awesome.
That's it. Go ahead.
Right on. Okay, so now we want to know about, we've kind of come up with a way to start to sort out what customers value. Now we want to think about how do they value it. And yes, I am going to do a little bit here in terms of the way these things work. And I think it's helpful to learn and to understand because it gives you a framework to think and move forward on. So we talked about this earlier, right? This cost plus idea. And there's some work. By the way, most of the stuff that you see written out there about pricing, it comes from this fundamental research that's happened in the late 70s, 80s, some of the late 90s. And I'm referencing two bodies of work here. One is from Robert Dolan. He is a Harvard Business School professor, and he was actually the dean at the University of Michigan Business School, my alma mater, like Peach said. And he came up with a very keen insight. And he said, look, when you can price, when the market will pay you a price that's higher than your COGS, that's an incentive for you to sell. And we already talked about that's not an incentive for us to build a business, but it is an incentive to sell. And this is the insight. It's when the perceived value that the customer sees being delivered from your product is higher than the price, that becomes the customer's incentive to buy. This is the fundamental basis of what's called value-based selling, and it was invented by Robert Dolan, okay? And the credit is down at the bottom here. And what's important for us to understand here is that that value piece, the perceived value, again, is in reference to their unmet needs, right? This is our job as an entrepreneur. Understand the unmet needs, right? Understand the perceived value. And so we can get insight by tapping into that perceived value, right? Understanding this to better understand what they will actually pay, okay? And if you think of it, marketing, I know you guys don't have a marketing function in your company, but I should say marketing department, but you have a marketing function, right? And that job is about raising perceived value toward the true economic value that your product delivers. So marketing are things like being in tune with the right buyer persona that values your product and benefits the most. Being in tune with what are the benefits that are the most important for this problem, for this buyer, right? So that's the role, is creating and raising that perceived value. Okay, that's one concept. There's another concept by a couple of Nobel Prize winning scientists. Actually, only one was awarded the Nobel Prize because the other one passed away. But this is Tversky, well, Kahneman and Tversky, and they did research back in the late 70s, 80s. I know it sounds like it's old, but it's called prospect theory. And this is the basis for so much of what happens in the world. And it is so critical for founders to understand these things, because you can apply them in meetings with your customers, okay? These are ways to hack the conversation, okay? And reduce and focus the set of questions you have. So the prospect theory came about because up until then, it was believed that people made decisions based purely on the utility of the product they were buying. If something had higher utility, people paid a higher price for it or made a decision to use it. And I'm not going to get into the details on prospect theory, but it basically just said that that's not always true and it's situational. And the implication for founders is that the minute we go and we talk to a customer about a potential solution that we have to offer, immediately that customer thinks about a substitute. They are very quickly, their intuitive brain is very quickly trying to figure out, wait, what is this like? What would this work with? What are other alternatives? How, like, what? It's like when someone tells you a movie and they're like, oh, it's like if Spider-Man met Driving Miss Daisy, that's what the movie's about, right? Like they're giving you something so that intuitively you know what it really means, right? The other thing that prospect theory gives us are complements. What are the things that are probably already used by the customer that will work well with my product, right? What do you expect Molly to already have that's going to work? And you need to be teasing that out. You need to think about that before you go have your conversation with your customer. You've got to have knowledge about what's going on so that you can make the best of those interviews, those discussions, right? Now, when you're having the conversations, a different part of that person's brain gets kicked into gear. So while they've been trying to figure out like, oh, what is this product like? What else could I be using instead of it? What works well with it? Their other part of their brain is this reasoning part, right? And that is more evaluative. It's more comparative. And that's where different models come into play. We'll talk about that in a second, right? And so for substitutes, a good tactic or exercise would be for you to take your product and think through this as if you were the customer, right? What are the alternatives to the problem? Well, you could do nothing and just let it ride. You could eliminate the root cause. You could just keep whatever you've got. In Molly's case, it was a homegrown product that they're using that isn't really optimal. If you don't have something, you could build it. You could hire somebody to come build something or just do it for you. Or you could buy a different product, right? So I urge you, like if you start trying to answer all these things and take it 1, 2, 3 steps, if you think critically about these things, you are going to be so prepared for these conversations with your customer, Okay? If you've thought ahead about what other products they might buy or what the result of not addressing the problem might be, you're going to be prepared for that conversation. Okay? The other part of this conversation is, complements, right? What other products might work in the same workflow, right? So if you're, the API monitoring, maybe there's a logging function, maybe there's an API development tool. Those are all part of the same workflow, but they do a different thing. What are some common integrations that might need to go along? One of the ones I like to use is if you're selling Salesforce automation software, you're probably going to need to do a marketing integration and a data analytics integration with Domo or Tableau, right? It's just common sense. It's going to have to happen. So your job as a founder is to understand your customers so well that you'll get immediately, oh, they're going to want to know if this integrates. They're going to want to know if this works alongside of. They're going to want to know if this can join the workflow that exists for this process in their company. Interestingly, tech adoption profile comes into play here as well. This last part, the reasoning part, is where I think many of you are trying to go first, which is you're trying to figure out, like, well, is there budget available? Who's going to pay for it? How is budget allocated? What department is in charge of it? Is there a decision-making unit, or is the buyer and the decider the same people, or is it a committee of 8 people that I've got to go through with legal, finance, security, go down the list? Does the customer expect to have to do a trial, right? They want to try it in their environment before they buy it. Are they going to do a competitive bake-off? Are they going to run my product alongside of another product and see which one works better for the users, works better for the company? Are they going to do some sort of cost-benefit analysis, right? Are they going to do internal user surveys, right? You guys could just add to this list, but this is where your customer is going to be using this reasoning part to understand, how they're going to value it, right? How much is it worth? So with that, right, this is just kind of, what are these customers doing to kind of come up with, how am I going to think about this, right? They're going to think about budget. They're going to think about what problems it's solving. They're going to think about it in terms of substitutes and complements. What other products do I have? What other alternatives, right? If I build it internally, how much is it going to cost me? That gives you something in the ballpark. If I hire somebody externally to do it for me, what's that going to cost me? If I hire a different product, right, by a competitor, what's that going to cost me? See, this is how a buyer thinks, and they start to arrange a ballpark of cost or price associated with the value that solving these unmet needs will provide. Does that make sense? And so the hack here is to do those 3 things. Be diligent and intentional about thinking through what are the possible substitutes, the complements, and what are the reasoning tools they're going to use to go figure all this out. And the more you investigate that, the better 360 perspective you're going to get for how they're thinking about what it's going to cost to buy the solution. Okay. Separately from that is about capturing the value, right? Like, you actually delivered value to a customer, but now you actually have to go and catch it. Does anybody know what this is called? It's called monetization. Okay. Monetization is the process of earning revenue from your asset. That's kind of the dictionary, right? The way we think about it is it's the process of capturing the value that your product delivers. Why is this important? Well, because monetization is utterly separate from pricing, completely separate. Pricing is about how much you charge and how you charge. Monetization is about how you capture. And this is another one of those, please, this is a key takeaway from this talk, right? Before you go out and talk to customers about price, please consider this. Your monetization strategy, which is essentially your business model, is inextricably linked to your product. You cannot tease them apart. So much so, I call them quantum entangled for the nerds and geeks out there. If you change something in product that's fundamental to the product, it is highly likely that it will reflect a change, a necessary change in monetization. And the vice versa is true. If you want to start monetizing differently, it is highly likely you're going to have to change the product. So the takeaway here is that you have to match your monetization to the market you're approaching, right? That customer, that buyer, and the product you're building. And it has to be this three-way alignment that has to be in sync. And if it's not, you will not scale your business. So some common models, I love starting with freemium because I hear this all the time. I hear a lot of mentors, coaches saying, start with freemium. Well, think about this previous slide, right? It works well in some places and it is horrible in others. And we know the players in this space, right? Slack and Zoom, they do this. One of the key aspects of a freemium monetization model is you have to have two tiers. You have to have a free tier and you have to have a paid tier. Subscription, very common, right? It's the membership economy or paying for access. This works well when you have customers that are routinely using a product, right? Over and over and over and over again. Interestingly, this is being used now by vineyards, right? I picked a name brand here, Kendall Jackson, but everybody does wine clubs now because subscriptions give you the ability to lock out competitors that only sell on a transactional basis. If I'm Kendall Jackson and I sell a year, multi-year subscription to wine, and that customer is getting half a case of wine 4 times a year, they're less likely to buy competitor wine, right? I'm going to get more of their share of wallet. So this is where subscription is a good place where you want to lock out competitors and where customers are using your product routinely. The next one, value metric. This is something we're going to talk a lot about. This is the standard model we see a lot, right? Pay as you go or as you grow. Twilio, great example, charges by a metric called calls or API calls. There are other models here too, right? Dynamic. You might see this in the wild. This is travel industry, right? This is Uber. The price, Uber captures value based on the market condition, based on supply and demand, right? This works well when supply is constrained. Auction, different. This is when the seller owns the supply, right? But the market takes care of pricing. The market condition in dynamic chooses the price. The market itself, right? The arbitrage between buyer and seller chooses the price in the auction model. Right? So getting familiar with these, becoming a student of these are super important because you've got to figure out this for your business, right? Which one makes the most sense? And as you guessed, many companies wind up using multiple models, right? So here's an example, Slack and Zoom, they're employing freemium, subscription, and their value metric is a per seat measure, right? Now, there's some things that are in common about these, right? They've got a huge market, they have very low cost of goods sold to make their product. Their products have inherent growth, right? They're viral by nature. Customers are using the product all the time. Those companies have 100% control over how customers use the product. The customers can't change Slack. They can't change Zoom. Yes, they might use it for different use cases, but that's not what we're talking about here, right? Like I go out and I buy a hammer and then I use it as a pick in my garden to dig a hole. That isn't DeWalt having control over how I use the product, right? That is it being used completely differently. And the customer experience on a per seat basis for these two companies is such that when more people use the product, the value for everybody gets better. And that's a reason why per seat makes sense as a value metric. And if we take one little closer step up, I really want to drive this home for everybody, is that, let's take a look at freemium and when it works for a market and a product. The freemium model has a lot of advantages, right? You really reduce your customer acquisition costs. The free tier is really the advertising and the marketing for the paid tier. Your customers don't have to pay anything to enter. But on the flip side, turns out from the research, you need more than 10% of your free users must convert to paid in order for this model to actually work. And it also turns out that 90% of companies that use this model fail, And so if we look at it, what market conditions create a situation where freemium might be an option? It has to be a huge market because you need that base of free users. And it needs to be a market in which you can divine a very accurate willingness to pay for your target customer. So if you don't have a market where you can do those two things, freemium's probably not for you. From a product perspective, your product should have inherent growth. If it is not inherently viral, right? Slack, the way it works is you message someone, they become a Slack customer. By using the product, it is viral. There's products out there I've used that are freemium that have no component of virality, no inherent growth. Their cost for acquisition is going to skyrocket. They won't be able to maintain the freemium model. So, sorry, I know I'm going down a little bit here. Is this okay, level of detail? Is this making sense? Good kind of discussion on the monetization piece? Okay. One thing that we see a lot is people conflating these two things, freemium and free trial. They are not the same. Two utterly different things. Freemium is a way to capture the value you deliver. Free trial is a tactic for marketing and sales to help smooth customer adoption and the sales cycle. Many customers might want to use the product in their environment before making a decision. It might be part of their buying process. So you can implement a free trial. That has nothing to do with capturing value. It has everything to do with the sales cycle, reducing the length of time, giving customers what they need to make decisions, okay? All right, so the last section here, we know, or actually two more things and we're gonna be into questions. So we know how to capture the value, right? Now we need to know about how to charge for that value. And this is a key book. I'm going to give you a set of recommended books. This is one of the key 4 books, Monetizing Innovation. There's a lot of sites in here, credits in here from this. And this is the key takeaway. How you charge, this goes back to monetization, right? How you charge always trumps what you charge. It is by far more important. So if you're going to spend 10 hours on pricing, spend 9 on figuring out how you're going to charge and spend 1 on what the price point is. And so this value metric idea is about how you charge, okay? And so the key takeaway here is a good value metric aligns with the value that you deliver to the customer, but also grows with the customer and your business. It has to be both. Because otherwise you get into a trap and you do not monetize the right way, you do not capture the value the right way, and you won't run the right economics for your business. So let's take a look, right? So how are we going to figure out value metrics? How are we going to figure out how to charge, or what, we're going to do paid per user, per API call, per month. What are we going to do? Well, we can start with some clues. We can look at our buyer persona research. We can also look at our product. Right? We can say, what is this primary benefit our product provides? And then we can also look at what are the things that make it up. So in our case, with an API monitoring product, it delivers API monitoring, and then it has all these subcomponents. But you can go a step further and you can think through, what are the key features? And sometimes that provides some inspiration. And I will tell you, most of the time, per seat is flat out wrong. It's only in the cases where the more the merrier is the way to go, where everybody wins when more people are on the product, right? And that's in cases like Slacks and the Zooms of the world, right? So if we continue this idea, right, API monitoring product, primary value, API monitoring, but if we look at the secondary components, right, we've got logging, analytics, insights, reports, dashboard. And if we think about those in terms of metrics, then we can think of them one by one. We say, okay, maybe API monitoring is number of calls. Maybe logging is the size of logs, or the number of logs could be a viable metric. Or we could look at analytics, maybe the number of models that are supported, or maybe the number of reports that can be created, or maybe the number of users that can access the dashboard, right? So it's this brainstorming tactic, and then looking at your product and understanding the subcomponents that give you the key to identify your top possible value metrics. And then you take those value metrics and what do you do? Anybody? 3 words. Talk to customers. So you go talk to customers, and you can use an advanced research technique. You can just have a conversation. You know, you can start using simple tools and get more advanced, but you want to have these conversations. You want to start to understand what their preferences are around a value metric. This is part of the vocabulary, right? What are their value metric preferences? This is how you determine what to charge. And so in this case, we've done some analysis, and it turns out that the mid-market mollies, again, one persona at a time, they prefer 2 different types of metrics: per user, number of dashboard users, and number of API calls. But you're like, okay, well, how the hell am I going to decide between the 2 of these? Well, you do something that I call vetting the value metric, all right? And so there's a series of tests that I've learned over my career, and I'm gonna go through them. And by the way, guys, you're getting all these slides, okay? So you'll have the whole thing, and I think Peach is recording this. The first kind of test and way to vet is it aligned with value? Does the metric match how the customer values the product? And look, from our conversations on the screen we just looked at here, it turns out, yeah, like we know that one of these 2, they like them because we asked the customer and they do like it. Is it acceptable? Do they understand what it means? Is it consumable? This is important. Does it match the way they budget? Key point. Is it predictable? Can the customer think in advance about what their cost might be for your product as their company grows? Can you predict what your cost to serve and what value you might capture from that customer if they grow? Is it scalable? Is it commensurate with when a customer grows? Does the model have enough flexibility to contemplate growth in that customer, right? Is it audible? Is there a way for you to know how much your customer is using the product? Is there a way for the customer to know? Is that transparent between you and the customer? These are key ways to vet this metric. Is it sustainable? Does it contemplate, you know, a year or 2 out, right? What are the trends in the market that are happening? Are people, you know, like what happened years ago when we moved to a subscription economy, right? That was a big market trend that put a lot of value metrics out of business. And is it differentiable? Does it set you apart in the market? And then I take a look at them. And if we look at dashboard users, we just run down the list. Is it aligned with value? It is for them because they could scale from maybe 10 APIs under management to 100 to 1,000 to 10,000. And maybe they add 2 users to the dashboard or 4, but they're using the hell out of your product and you're not able to capture the value. So it is aligned for them, but not aligned for you. Yes, it's acceptable in these things. Is it scalable? Nope, for the reasons I just mentioned. You will never be able to capture the value of your product if you use a per seat model in this example, right? But if we look at API calls, it's green down the list. If you start thinking about all of these tests, you start to realize through your research and through your own cognition that this is a great, great metric to use as a value metric, right? And I left the one in there, sustainable, because who knows, market trends might change, right? And that's a hard one. You don't need to get all of these right. You just need to be thinking them through and try to do your best at the beginning. There's no way you'll nail every single one of these, okay? All right, so if we know how to charge for the value we're delivering, right? We just figured out our value metric. Now we're actually going to answer the question, what price do I charge, right? And so one of the things I like to talk to people about is before, remember we were talking about the user and we were talking about the idea of substitutes, complements, and the reasoning. They're going to think about other products that give them a placeholder. Imagine this sphere of possible prices, right? Substitute and complements give them some ideas. These are all out there. Well, market size matters. And there's an article I urge every one of you to read. It's I use this one a lot in my go-to-market talk. It's by Christoph Jans. It's called 5 Ways to Build a $100 Million Business. And it's very simple, right? He just says, look, if you look at markets, they break down in kind of a logarithmic scale, right? They've got thousands of customers. This number 1 on the left, those are the elephants. Tens of thousands of customers are the deer. Hundreds of thousands of customers are the rabbits, and so on, until you get to the flies, which are tens or hundreds of millions of customers, right? Well, one of the things that becomes interesting is that if you just look at the market sizing, right, if you have, let's go back one slide. If you have a market of elephants, right? If you're selling tricked out A3, what is it? A340s, what's the big jump? Well, we'll just go with 747. You're selling tricked out 747s. There's like 2,000 companies in the world that buy that product. That's it, right? So if you're going to try to make $100 million from 1,000 companies, you have to charge every company $100,000 every single year, right? If you're in a market of 100 million customers, to make 100 million, you only need to charge each user $1 per year. So I'm not saying that this is like going to set your pricing, but it gives you some guidance, right, around what the market's going to bear. It actually is extremely important from a sales model perspective, because you cannot cover a market of 10 million customers with a field sales force. If we use this model, we pick our API monitoring product, we know that we've got a market. There's hundreds of thousands of customers, right? Any company that's out there building with software could potentially be a customer. Well, that means if we're going to try to make 100 million, at some time in our future, that our average revenue per account, not the price of our product, but from the account, from all of the products and services we sell to that account, needs to be in the thousands of dollars per year. Okay, if that's the case, then that means it's hundreds of dollars per month. Again, guys, I'm just ballparking. I'm just trying to whittle it in, right? The other thing you can look at, like we said before, what are the substitutes, the complements, what are the reasoning? Well, other SaaS API tools charge around $400 or $500. The other complementary SaaS tools that are in the API and engineering space are $600 a month. We're starting to get a ballpark. So this is one method of doing it. There's another method. It looks like a fancy research technique. It's somewhat fancy. It's called a direct willingness to pay question. This is a standard question. It was developed, I'm trying to remember how long ago. It's not ancient, but it's old. And it just asks 4 questions to a customer, right? Once they understand your product, right, you have to have the context of what problem are we solving? What's my product? How does my product solve the problem? All that, with all that context, then you ask the customer, hey, how much would be too much to spend on this product? How much would be too low because you think it would be too cheap, that there's no way that it could do it? A good example there is you're trying to sell a Boeing 747 jet for $50. No one will buy it because they know that there's something wrong with it, because you can't make a Boeing 747 for $50. That's an extreme case, but it shows the point. It's also about like, what's an expensive price, but they'd still consider buying it? And then what's a price that's a bargain where they're like, I'll buy it every single day at that price, right? So you ask these 4 questions, you ask dozens, hundreds of customers, and you get these lines. By asking each of those questions, you plot them, and it creates these 2 intersection points on the outside, and this is what's referred to as an acceptable price range. And look at this range. It's like $300, right? It's a huge range. But guys, we're entrepreneurs. We don't know the exact answer, right? We're out there to get started, but at least we start to have a better idea of ranges and what makes sense, right? And what's really compelling about this is this. If you just look at the people that say that price is too expensive and that price is too cheap, and if you put those curves together, you get all people that won't buy at a certain price. And the graph looks something like this. And so everything in red and purple are people that think the price is too cheap to buy it or too expensive to buy it. Now, there's something very interesting about this. What this is a plot of, anybody that's in the curve, anything in gray means they won't buy it. So less gray is good. Well, right at the very, very bottom of that trench is a price point of $400. And at that point, out of 100 customers surveyed, 93 will buy it. 93%. So that's really our maximum market share point, is at $400. But look what happens. When these 2 curves come together, it actually goes horizontal for a way. And what we find out is that if we just raise price some, we might lose a little bit of market share from 93 to 87. So now only 87% of people will buy, but all 87% will buy at $550. So even though we knew the range was 280 to 670 or whatever, now through this other direct questioning, we're able to come up with a finer tuned range. And by looking at the data, we can start to see finer grain detail. And this is gold. This has an incredibly dramatic impact on your recurring revenue, on your revenue. Because if you have 100 customers and you charge 90 and 93 of them, excuse me, if you have 93 out of 100 customers, right? And you charge them $400 a month, that's 37K a month in revenue. But if you charge only 87 customers, 550, that's 47K a month. So by doing that little bit of data analysis and you raise your price, you've now improved that monthly return, MRR by 30%. You've raised 10K per month, which is 100K in revenue per year. That, by the way, guys, your cost to sell didn't change. You just dropped 10K straight to profit per month. So
there's a question on the chat.
Okay, yeah, sure, go ahead.
This is from Kanav. It says, once you have a value metric, like saying API calls volume, do you charge them in buckets or on a linear scale? And then do you charge less for every marginal call, or does the pricing increase initially and then decrease?
So my question back to that is, could you actually measure it and manage 100 customers that are increasing their usage that way? The answer is no. As a startup, I mean, I've done it before. You can't do it. You can't try to manage every single customer and if they incremented API calls by one. So the answer is you've got to find a happy medium. There's no silver bullet. Buckets is a good way to start, right? That's what Salesforce does on a per seat model. Many others do. And so that's a good way to start tackling it. But you've got to do something that is measurable. Remember the definition or the tests? Is it auditable? If you implement a value metric and don't put some guardrails around it or buckets of 50 or whatever it is, it's not auditable, it's not measured, it's not scalable, you won't be able to monitor it, and so it fails as a metric, right? So that is the next level of thinking, is how am I going to actually scale it up? So we talked about optimization and growth. You might be thinking, like, how the hell do I get started? The first thing to do is go read these books. I actually have a Cliff Notes version of Monetizing Innovation. I did my own kind of Cliff Notes summary of it that I'll shoot over to Peach and she can share with you. But I highly recommend each of these books. Oddly, I've kind of put them in the order of kind of my favorites. The two on the left are more like recipes, just like frameworks you can follow. And the two on the right are a little more analytical and strategic. And then the thing to do is think about these 6 areas, right? And think about the one that's least understood or maybe might be most impactful and go readdress it. I urge you to not assume that you've done enough work in any one of these areas, okay? And I want you to walk away with this idea that pricing is a process, right? It's mission critical to your business. This is about value. It's all about understanding how a customer thinks about your product and the value it delivers. It is about getting inside their head. It's not about just putting numbers out there and seeing how they react. It's about understanding how they're reacting so that you can be more efficient in your data collection and your application of the data, right? And ultimately, your best customers, right? You have to be thinking about this minimum viable customer segment. You don't need a lot of customers right now. I urge you, avoid the risk of thinking you need tons and tons and tons of, unless you're a consumer product that's monetizing through advertising, you do not need a lot of customers. You're at a stage where you just need to get customers so you can find repeatability and predictability and scalability. And the way to do that is to find the customers that value your most differentiated features and benefits, the one you can provide alone, right? And little matrix reference here, by now you've kind of taken the red pill and down the rabbit hole you go, right? And so there's much more to happen. once you start getting this idea of buyers, you really need to do the work of figuring out which of those are a lower cost to acquire, but also are willing to pay more so I can improve my margins. How do I use this to figure out my top level value prop and write my benefits? How do I pull the right features for the right buyer so that I don't dilute my product offerings? How do I put an offer together, right? There's lots of other things to explore. Also, I put all these, everything I've used to research and put this together, it's all in this, this presentation. And so you'll get all of this and the links will be in the PDF. And one thing I urge you to do is, you know, in the next 3 days, take something from this that you learned and put it to action. Promise to do it and share that promise with a colleague, because you'll be more likely to go complete it, right? So maybe it's setting up an interview session to talk about value metrics, right? Anyway, that's it, guys. I know we took some questions during it, but I want to open it up now for broad-based questions. Was it positive? I can't read the feedback here.
Can we jump back to that question that was asked earlier, saying?
Yeah, let's talk about it. Which one? Can you repeat it?
So I think it was where we were measuring the different, like measuring the value based on customer conversations, and then you were kind of putting it into a graph based on the actual customer persona.
Yeah. So
I think the question was, this seems quantitative, which is great, but are there any tricks to convert open conversations into data?
Okay, well, that really, let me go ahead and reshare. That is what we're talking about when we do things like our willingness to pay, right? Like the point of this is you could actually do this via conversations. You start having discussions with customers, 5 at first, 10, 15, 20, 100, 200, right? That's what it takes, by the way. You ask them these questions and all of a sudden you start to be able to plot points, and that's data. Is that what you're talking about? This is one way to do it.
Yeah, it was actually an earlier, it was the one referring to specific buyer personas. It was an earlier.
Oh, okay. Was it around us talking about like feature preferences?
There you go. Perfect. That's
yeah.
So how did you like quantify those?
Ah, yes. Okay. So the way this works is you do something like this. You go down into, I don't know if I have these here, but oh yeah, here's max diff. Okay, so this is what this looks like. So you would use a technique like this. Now again, you could use a survey tool, or you could just do this in person with somebody over the phone, right? You could present them with these options. Now, to make it statistically relevant, you've kind of got to follow some design rules, but this is the basics of what it looks like. You take a subset of your features and you show them to the customer one set at a time. Now remember, we had about 12 features, but I'm only showing 5 here, right? And you just have them choose. Pick your most preferred and your least preferred. And you give them another subset, and sometimes they're repeated, right? And there's there's rules. Guys, if you go research the technique, you'll learn a lot about it. And if you look at the resources I gave you, you can read all about these techniques and how they're built and blah, blah, blah. It's a rabbit hole, but the basis is just doing something like this, right? And then when you do this like 5, 6 times with the same customer, you've covered all of your features because you've gone through all the permutations, and you gather up all those scores. You use the formula that's right here, number of times they picked it most, number of times they picked it least, divided by the number of times it appeared. And when you do that, you get a normalized graph like you see on the right. And that's how that happens.
Yeah, so an issue that we're facing currently is that we have a lot of customers that are willing to use our products as a free trial period, but the reason that they're hesitant to pay is that we don't have any value metrics to back it up yet. So there's kind of 2 paths we can take, and I see both sides to it. My co-founder is kind of thinking, you know, if they're not willing to pay now, that's probably a good indication that they might not be willing to pay later, even if we can prove the value metric.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
That's good intuition.
Yeah. So,
I think
that's the route you would take. Is that
I would go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
So that's the route you would take. Like if they're not willing to pay now, then that just take that gut reaction.
No, I would go talk to them and explore. I would say, I would ask,
Okay.
because it's likely that you're addressing a problem. They just don't care that much about it.
Got it.
Guys, like, it's very, all right, I know this is going to sound a little preachy, but again, I've been doing this for around 30 years. And what you start to figure out is that there is no shortage of problems in the world to solve. And part of building a business is being able to solve a problem at scale, right? That you can do in a repeated way that actually you can make money doing, right? I know that sounds kind of like common sense, but building a solution to a problem is just product problem fit. That's all that is. That's not a business. I mean, I solve problems all day long. I literally, I'm still a developer. Sometimes I get in and I write some JavaScript to do some parsing. Like, I'm not building a business on that, but I developed a product to solve my problem, but that's not a business. And so what you have to do is you have to, just because you found a nail for your hammer, doesn't mean the customer needs your hammer. They could use their screwdriver to knock the nail down.
Sure.
There's,
go
ahead, Jake. Sorry.
All right. So you would go back and just kind of like experiment to see like what the real problem is to be solved there?
Yeah, I would go back and have discussions with them and ask them, talk to me about this issue. How does it complicate? It goes all the way back to the jobs to be done framework. I mean, you've got to use those interview techniques to keep asking why. And as you ask 5 to 7 whys, you will finally get to the root cause of why this is something that's concerning them. And then as your job as a founder is then to start to weave that back to an economic value. So how does this affect things like your performance as a product? Is that valuable to the company? How do you value it? What's the, you know what I mean? Like all of those sorts of questions have to come out, and you have to then, and part of that is getting an alignment on the value you're providing, right? But if you offer something free to a customer and they've got this nagging thing on the side, and all of a sudden your Band-Aid is solving it, and you gave it to them for free, and they don't have that little itch anymore, that's, they don't really need your Band-Aid. They could just suffer the itch for a little bit, right? So that's why I said you've got to be urgent and important.
Got it. Thanks.
Yep.
There is one more question on the chat, and then this one will probably be our last one. So this one's from Kathy. It says, have you ever found conjoint analysis trade-off of value of features successful?
Yeah, so that brings up kind of another interesting point here, which is on survey techniques. And this is something I put together, which is depending on what your goal is, you can use different techniques. Now, everybody, the things on the right are in this realm of like market research. I am not suggesting that you become statisticians and market researchers, right? But as a founder, you have to know a little bit about this so you can do the right things. And by the way, this is where founders go wrong, because they think they can make a shortcut. And they think they're making data-driven decisions, but they're not collecting the right data. And so bad data in equals bad questions, equals bad data out, equals bad decisions. So on the right, these are the kinds of things that very mature companies with budget do. And where conjoint comes into play is in these areas of testing preferences. And it's also useful for finding segments that are kind of hidden. You can also use max diff. There's something called latent class analysis. It's like these exotic things, right, around research techniques. But yes, you can use conjoint for customer seg, and you can also use it in a way that enables customers to pick products of different configurations, and that will give you a result of what packages might be the best for that persona. So.
Awesome. And with that, I think we'll have to close there. But Pete, thank you so much for coming. It's always a pleasure to see you, even if it's through the screen. And everyone, Once all of the documents are collected, I'll post on the class Slack where the slides and the recording can be accessed. So you guys